Okay, so today we're going to talk about altitude medicine, and probably the best way to do that is to actually contemplate climbing an actual mountain. And one of the most commonly climbed mountains in the world because of its easy access and the novelty factor of obviously seeing ice over Africa is Kilimanjaro. So we'll kind of look at Kilimanjaro in terms of the logistics of climbing it. We'll talk about the effects of altitude, and we'll also talk a little bit about what happens to people if they get sick on a mountain like Kilimanjaro. Okay, Kilimanjaro is a freestanding mountain in Tanzania. It's one of the 7 summits, which means it's the highest mountain on the African continent. And of course, that makes it highly popular in terms of a tourist destination. It's also important to realize that Kilimanjaro, although it's nearly 6,000 meters above sea level, does not require any technical skills to climb. Leaving aside the actual effects of altitude and the fact that you obviously need a certain level of fitness, there are no specific technical skills. You don't need ropes, you don't need crampons, you don't need ice axe. It's fundamentally a walk at high altitude. So Kilimanjaro is 19,340 feet above sea level, or 5,895 meters tall. It's the highest freestanding mountain in the world, and as we said before, it's one of the 7 summits. Now, there are certain rules about climbing Kili. You can't just turn up and do it yourself. You've got to climb with a designated operator. You have to follow one of the designated and approved routes for climbing the mountain. There currently is no limit on daily starts, which means that as many people as sign up with a designated operator can start climbing the mountain on any given day. And that can lead to serious overcrowding. Some high-altitude locations, like for example the Inca Trail, have put limits on daily starts in an attempt to control the crowds and actually preserve the integrity of the trail and allow for trail maintenance as well. So Inca Trail, for example, limits the starts to 500 per day. But on Kili, there's effectively no limit. And I think we've got to recognize that Kili is pretty much on everyone's bucket list. So overcrowding becomes a bigger and bigger problem each year. There are a number of routes that are approved to climb Kili, and you can see them listed on the slide here. There are quite a few other options and variants which you can get permission for. And there's one specific route for descent which everybody has to follow regardless of how they went up. If you're specifically looking for excitement, one of the routes you might contemplate is the Western Bleach, but not too many people travel up this one. It's steep, involves about 850 meters of ascent at one stage in under 2 kilometers, and there's a bit of scrambling. There's some potential for rockfall. It's certainly pretty but dangerous, and it was actually increasing in popularity till about 2006 when 3 people died in a rockfall. So maybe the Western Bleach is the best, the most exciting, and also the most dangerous of routes, and for that reason you don't see too many people on it these days. This map just shows you the various different approaches you can take to the mountain, and what you can see is that some of the routes are relatively short, and in fact can be undertaken in around 4 to 5 days. Some of the routes are a little bit longer and can take up to 8 days. And one of the things to note from that is obviously that the longer you spend on the mountain, the greater your chances of acclimatizing, and therefore the greater your chance of success. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. This photo just shows you the same routes, just in a slightly different perspective. The route that we've taken in the times that I've gone to Kili have been the Shira 2 route that you can see down here. It's a fairly lengthy route, and it spends quite a bit of time traversing around the mountain at around somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 meters altitude, thereby allowing you significant time for acclimatization. It eventually comes up here to the Lava Tower, which is a spectacular place to camp overnight, and then up to the Barranca Wall, from where it eventually heads up to Barafu, which is the final campsite before you then go for the summit. Here again you can see the routes up the mountain, the most common routes that people take, and down here you can see our personal favourite, Shira, usually spending 7 nights on the mountain. Relatively hard, interesting terrain that can be quite challenging at times, although it's still a walk, but relatively few people. And so that combination of relatively few people and 7 nights on the mountain generally makes for a much more successful as well as enjoyable trip.